Okay, well, I very, very excited for this discussion today. So, very lucky. We are very lucky to be joined by Ben Modell, who is the founder and president for Undercrank Productions, and amongst many other things, which we'll very shortly dive into. But Ben, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really glad to be on the show.
Yeah, of course, and kind of have a special treat for you as well. For anybody who's heard, few months back, we interviewed Kirk McDowell from the George Eastman Museum and Library. And once Kirk found out that we were interviewing Ben, we got excited about the idea of Kirk coming back on and being able to actually have his love of silent film and classic cinema kind of represented here with Ben. So, Kirk, thanks so much for joining as well.
It's great to be back.
All right, awesome. So I think, right out of the gate, Ben, obviously I introduced you as founding Undercrank Productions, and from the focus of this podcast is, and the initial kind of idea was to talk to physical media companies, so that's why I wanted to introduce you that way. Obviously, the world knows you as many things
Yeah.
around silent films. So, I'm curious to hear if, as you moved from being the world's leading silent film accompanist, did I say it right?
Yeah. That's fine.
Okay. To uh, then getting the idea to actually start producing your own discs. Um, can you just kind of give maybe a little background into how that started and
yeah.
what you're trying to do with Undercrank? 'Cause I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Like a lot of things that I get involved with, I started out just seeing if I could do it, and let's see. It looks like I could do this and take this and put it with this and make it look like this and put it out this way. And what do you know? And then it kind of snowballs from there. The way the silent comedy watch party, the second week of March of 2020, I thought, nobody can leave their house, and I actually have all the tech I need to put this together. Let's see if it works. And then, uh, our second anniversary show, episode 78, is coming up in March. So it's
Amazing.
become this big thing that I never planned, but it just sort of happened. I I've always been really interested in how DVDs and I guess and then eventually also Blu-rays, how home video gets made and distributed.
Hmm.
And I've always been interested in marketing and publicity, and have had great opportunities over the years to talk with people who were the publicists at the Moma's film department or somewhere else, and just picking their brains and finding out how that sort of thing works. Just very interested in things like marketing and promotion, as well as just the nuts and bolts of how a DVD gets made. And there's uh, I started with a bunch of silent films that I had sitting on my shelf. I had won these things on eBay. A couple of them had come to me from other sources, but they were the only copies around of these films, or the only copies that circulated.
Oh, wow.
And so I had them, and I've been doing something called the Silent Clowns film series, which I launched with a guy named Bruce Lawton in 1997, and also now it's me and Steve Massa when we're in person, who we get up and we co-host the shows. I play the piano. Bruce does the programming. But I had accumulated a lot of these comedy shorts, thinking, they would get to be shown either at the Silent Clowns film series or at uh, the festival called Slapstickon that also no longer exists. And they never really got shown, but they were still the only copies or rare copies. And I felt like if I have these films and nobody can see them, then they're still lost. And there's really not much difference between throwing them in the garbage can and the films
Yeah.
and not having the films. So I I figured out the nut. I had, by this point, this is 2012. I'd figured out the nuts and bolts to get things transferred or scanned. I'd done a lot of research, and this is into a few things. One of them was crowdfunding. So Kickstarter was just starting to tip at that
Okay.
point,
Okay.
um, and the notion of being directly connected to fans and as a way to make something happen, as opposed to working with a giant company and having big, big press releases and stuff like that. But if you're already connected to people, and you let them know what you're doing, then ideally they'll jump in. And it was also around this time that Louis C.K., the comedian Louis C.K., self-produced a
Uh-huh.
concert video at the Beacon Theater out of his own pocket, made it available over his website, and made
Oh,
all his money back in 2 days.
right.
Okay. Okay.
Charging $5, you could either download it or stream it, and he completely made an end run around the industry. And I thought, oh well, this totally works. I mean, he has different kind of a fan base than I do, and much bigger. And so I thought, okay, I have a mailing list that I've accumulated over a number of years, and then I just took that idea plus Kickstarter plus manufacture on demand. And
Okay.
Create Space doesn't exist anymore, but at the time, Amazon had a manufacture on demand arm called Create Space. It was for music, DVDs, and books. I think they pulled the plug on everything but the books last year, and the books is called Kindle Direct or something like that. But anyway, the thing that I realized is that with Create Space, if you put a DVD out, it automatically gets on Amazon. And I realized also that there's no like being on Amazon and really being on Amazon. So that's the one thing where the playing field is leveled between me and say Criterion. Being, if you're on, you're on. And so I came up with the idea for this DVD that I kickstarted, um, that I called "Accidentally Preserved." I came up with this
Yeah.
term. I came up with this term, which maybe somebody has used it, but I was trying to. I have somewhere a sheet of paper I wrote down all these names for what you could call these films where the only copy that exists because it was made in 50 millimeter prints in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and I came up with "Accidentally Preserved." My friend Marlene Weissman, who's a graphic designer who has been doing graphics for the Silent Clowns for years. But before that, in her other life, in the 90s, she was a graphics person on Saturday Night Live. The Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, Jan Hooks era of Saturday Night
Oh
Live.
my gosh.
And,
Okay. Great.
and
Yeah.
before that, doing graphics for a late night with David Letterman. So she has she has a great love of silent film, but also has a commercial design background. She's a brilliant artist. So what I did is I built into the budget, hiring her to do the box art because, as I've learned, and I tell this to everybody, in the online world, your artwork is your first line of defense, and it has to look good, and it has to look good, 1 inch high, and it's got to look good on a mobile device, and it's got to be eye catching, and just taking an old movie poster that you've right clicked from Heritage and slapping it on the front of something, which a lot of companies now do, it doesn't really stand out. So that the whole idea was let's see if I can do this. And I learned authoring. I mean, I've been doing some DVD authoring. I got the films I had scanned, made the DVD. Marlene did the cover, and I don't know, maybe 160, 170 people backed the project. And I couldn't believe it that the hardest thing about doing at least the first Kickstarter is getting yourself past the idea that you're asking people for money. Um,
Okay.
if you're just a person and not a company where you go to lunch with a bunch of hedge fund people and ask them for a lot of money. So
Uh-huh.
that's basically like what started out as Accidentally Preserved Volume 1, just gradually became what Undercrank Productions is now, where we've got 25 titles in release as of the very beginning of March, but we'll have another one out in April, and we actually have about a half dozen other projects in production right now.
Oh,
And
that's
again,
great.
this is again after 2 years of just not being able to do anything. I mean, it took me 2 years It took me a year, about a year, to do the Horton project, and it shouldn't have. But it just was so hard to concentrate and stay focused on anything during COVID.
Yeah.
But there were a number of projects I was able to percolate so that all of a sudden I've got hard drives coming to me and ProRes files are being uploaded all over the place and scores are being done. So we'll have a lot of stuff out. It was not something I intended to do. I did not set out to start a label, and but I that's what wound up happening. And what happened over and over was that I would hear about a film or a series of films that, boy, this is really good. This should really be out there. I guess I better produce a DVD with this, because and that's just built up, and it's kind of become what, quote unquote, what we do is the films that don't have Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd or Mary Pickford or Greta Garbo or Clara Bow in them. Uh, Let Criterion and uh, you know Kino Lorber and Flicker Alley and all the folks at Lobster, they can do the big budget things for the big famous people, but there are plenty of stars who everyone went to see while they were waiting for Charlie Chaplin to make his next film, and whose films are good and worth seeing, and because so many people can really get into silent film or even classic film because so much is available now. Pointing out that there is a landscape to fill out and then also filling it out is really what we do.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. I have about 100 questions that just come off
Yeah.
of that intro.
Oh yeah.
But one of the things that jumps out to me, just as a sign of good fortune, Arrow Video started off from Kickstarter.
Uh-huh.
Or at least their transition to Blu-ray. I forget. Anyways, but there's a sign of that's what your future looks like. So congratulations ahead of time on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it is. Yeah. We'll see. But this is the great thing about the era we're in now is that things like Kickstarter and the internet and the different social media platforms allow you to connect directly with people who want to see this stuff, and it's easy to get press if you have a Buster Keaton thing because everybody loves Buster Keaton. You can't miss. No matter how many times somebody does another new restoration of the General, there will be a market for it.
uh-huh.
But Edward Everett Horton, who knew he made 8 comedy shorts. But if people now, I mean, I'm at a point now where people know who I am and know what I do and know that the quality of what we put out is the quality of what we put out. And so when I did the Kickstarter for Beverly of Graustark last month, it funded in 2 hours. And the next project
really
will probably, I mean, the next one will probably do the same thing. I'll be doing a Kickstarter in March.
Wow. And before we get too much into that, that's very exciting news. We weren't sure if he's going to be able to make it or not, but we have surprise good news that Eric from Reddit as Captain Gib, was able to make it. So Eric, thank you so much for joining in the discussion.
Oh yeah. Good to see you. And I like to we're all on Zoom looking at each other. And for those of you listening, if you're not listening, you won't know what I'm saying. But Eric has a very nice display of DVDs that I've scored or have released behind him. So thank you so much for putting that together. That's
yeah,
great.
Of course.
Yeah.
My apologies for running late. I thought it was at 7, not 5:30. So my apologies for that.
That's quite all right. I'm glad you're here.
We're happy
to be here.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So Ben, that intro was awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
There's a lot in that I think is super interesting to unpack. One of the things that you just kind of casually laid out was all these amazing connections that you have. And so was that something that you built up over the years through the work you're doing in creating, custom music for a lot of these old silent films?
Some of it is, the films that I'm releasing are either things I've gotten from private collectors or the Library of Congress. I've been accompanying silent films at the Library of Congress since they opened the Packard campus down in Culpeper, and so the connections and the people I've built relationships with there have made it a big part of what I do. In fact, the co-branding arrangement that I have with the Library of Congress came out of because I would go down to play for something, but I'll go down for 2 or 3 days and I'll hang out, and Rob Stone and I will pull stuff from the vaults, we'll watch it or whatever, and I kept telling Rob was fascinated by this business model I'd come up with, because Rob has run other businesses in previous lives before his work first at UCLA and now at the Library of Congress. And he kept saying, well, how many units do you have to sell before you break even? And I said, 0. This is the big bugaboo that you have to work around, and which a lot of people don't know or understand, is that with pressed product, there's a minimum number, and I will never sell 1,000 of any of this stuff. Maybe the Horton project, I may get close to it, but the Family Secret with Baby Peggy is a couple hundred, and that's been out for 8 or 9 years, and so Rob and I kept talking about this, and so I became more aware of and familiar with the process with the Library of Congress, through which you can access by purchasing files of things. They are a government-run archive, and so they can do that. And other archives do not have that luxury of being funded by the government, and so as much as fans complain, well, why don't they put this out, and why doesn't such and such an archive do this? It's like, yeah, do you know how much money it costs for them to do anything? That's why that is the tricky thing, and I completely understand it. So through getting to know people from my trips down to the Library of Congress, that's helped me just familiar with the collection. But there are other archives I've worked with through doing going to Mostly Lost and other festivals like that. I will tell you one other thing that I forgot to mention as far as why I was interested in producing and releasing Blu-rays is that is and DVDs is that it would help me get my work as a film accompanist out there more. I do get asked occasionally by the good folks at Kino Lorber to score things, but not all that much. And so this was another calling card kind of thing. I've done a lot of scoring for a real classic DVD, a small DVD-R label, but I thought that this might be another way of getting my work as a musician out there.
Yeah, and I know we want to talk a lot about Kickstarter kind of model and all of that, but since you mentioned being an accompanist, I think it's fair to delve into that a little bit. So I did want to ask how you got started with accompanying films, and was that born of a love of movies first, or a love of music first, or were they both parallel, or how did that start?
It was parallel. I started playing piano for silent films when I was a film production major at NYU. And this is in the early 80s, just before VHS and Laserdisc. So everything that was being shown on 16mm double perf prints with no sound. And I had grown up being a huge silent film fan. I was from the generation of the Black Hawk film catalogs and watching the silent years on public television. And I had a unique situation in that from the time I was 12 years old, I used to go over to Walter Kerr's house and watch silent film. This is the guy who literally wrote the book on silent comedy film. I got a copy of his book when I was 12 as a bar mitzvah present. And my folks remembered hearing somewhere that Walter Kerr and his wife Jean of Please Don't Eat the Daisies and many other wonderful things, lived in our town, and that Walter Kerr had a huge film collection. And I wrote him a letter, and a few days later he called back. I have a letter here from Ben Modell, and he was happy to have me over. So I arrived at film school having seen all of Buster Keaton's films, all of Chaplin's, Harry Langdon, Harold Lloyd, Raymond. I seen Raymond Griffith films, and and then when I volunteered to start playing for the film classes, I was playing for William K. Everson's classes, and then also got a chance to play for a course taught at Bridgeport University by Charles Silver at MoMA, who had gotten wind of my playing for things at NYU through whatever grapevine there was. And I met a guy named Lee Irwin, because what I did is I went around New York and I met everybody who was accompanying films, because I figured, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me ask the people who do this. And I had a few really nice conversations with Bill Perry, who I'm still in touch with. He's in his early 90s, and he's still writing music and arranging music. I think I spoke by phone with Donald Sosin. I met Stuart Oderman, and I think maybe Steve Stern. And I met Lee Irwin at the Carnegie Hall Cinema. And he became a friend and a mentor to me. And so I got started because I felt like I wanted to help these films not die in front of film students every week. The part I don't understand is I was very uncomfortable in front of other people, and I had never given a concert, and I still don't remember how I got past that. I remember the part of wanting to maybe secretly always play the piano for silent films, but I wanted to help these films work better. I do not know what maybe I thought, well, the lights are off and no one's looking at me and it doesn't matter. But there was this parallel interest in filmmaking, in music, and I think I secretly always wanted to give this a shot. And what was great about the time at NYU is Bill Everson showed more film than other teachers did. So I was playing for 2 features a week, plus something in Bob Sklar's class. And it was like silent film accompaniment boot camp. I mean, I just got to play for so much film. And, I would talk to Lee and try something in class and go back and talk to him. And, so I had this is how I got started. And then I did continue to play for films, but I didn't really lean into it as a profession for a bunch of years afterwards, because I was trying to do filmmaking and an improv and sketch and stand-up.
I want to point out, is Bill Perry, is that his name?
Yeah, William Perry.
Yeah, you have an interview with him, right, on your own podcast?
I don't. I want to. I have on my podcast, and thanks for mentioning my podcast, I have an interview with Harry Weiss.
Harry Weiss, that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and Harry Weiss was the first film accompanist at the Cinema Arts Center out on Long Island. And he was in his 90s, and when I started playing at that theater and found that he was still around, and he was sharp as a tack, I interviewed him by phone. But I'm trying to work out something to interview Bill Perry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to point people to that interview because it's very informative about the even earlier history of a silent film accompaniment.
Yeah. Harry played his first film in the late 30s. He was a college student at I think CCNY, and he played for Intolerance, and they booked a print from MoMA, and they gave him a cue sheet score, and he was an improviser. He put it aside and came up with his own score. And this must have been the early years of the MoMA's film library, because it started in 1935, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have to think all that playing for Everson and Robert Sklar, and that had to be a great kind of boot camp to kind of get started, because knowing all of the films that they were playing, because the Everson collection is housed here at the George Eastman Museum.
Right.
And so probably some of these prints are films that you played along with.
Oh yeah. And a lot of the stuff from the Everson collection is stuff where that was the only print. I remember, I mean, there other material has since turned up, but I remember going to preview his print of Our Parents' People, and there's a note taped to the can from Bill. Dear Ben, this is the only known print. Please be very careful. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the art of playing for silent films,
Sure.
because one of the really interesting things I think every time I'm at a screening or even watching a Blu-ray of a silent film is that it's such an odd kind of confluence of live performance and something that is static, that doesn't change. You can watch the film now, you can watch the film in 50 years, and it's going to be the same. But every performance can be different.
Yeah.
And the audience, if you're in a live, performance, the audience is going to be different every time. So I wanted to ask kind of how you view the role of the accompanist in that interaction.
Well, you're working as a cultural bridge in a number of different ways. One way is that people's expectations of a film score today are one thing, and what film scoring was in the 1920s is something else. And there are people and there are ensembles who play the cue sheet as it was published, so that today you are hearing what people heard in cinemas in 1921. However, that scoring technique does not work really anymore, and we're so used to what film music became in the mid 30s after underscore came back into general use after kind of disappearing in the early 30s. So I'm still playing fake classical music, which is what most of the cues are like. But I'm still I'm avoiding recognizable music. I'm trying not to repeat a cue too many times. I'm trying to use more subtle underscore and use of leitmotif, which is what we're more accustomed to today. You're all and I'm very aware of the people in the audience, as any of us who've accompanied films will tell you that it's a factor. So there's this Venn diagram. If you overlap, where the audience interacting with the screen, the audience interacting with me interacting with the screen, and me interacting and being aware of the audience, where all that stuff overlaps, I think that's really where the happening of what the silent film experience is really all about. So it's definitely, and like you said, every audience is different. A 2 p.m. show for ninth graders is going to be different from a Friday night show of Sons of the Desert members, which is going to be different from doing a show on a Saturday afternoon for kids and families, which is going to be different from a Tuesday night cineast, cinephile kind of an audience. So, as anybody who does live performance will tell you, it's always a factor, because you're part of the surfing, riding the waves that you're doing. In addition to scoring the film, is you're out of this corner of your brain, you're very much aware of the audience and how. And there's a moment, usually a few minutes in, where you can tell the audience has clicked in. Their radar has been retuned, and they're in the world. You've gotten them up into the world of the film.
You mentioned playing for kids, and it's one of the things that I really is kind of remarkable about you. There's a phrase that I've heard, I think, on one of your podcasts, where you talk about audience preservation.
Yes, that's one of my catchphrases. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's something I really take to heart, because a lot of these films, if we don't introduce them to young people, then I think the people that are interested in them is going to slowly go down. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Kids love this stuff, and to the same degree that they love it, the adults think that they're not going to. Oh, it's black and white. There's no sound. They have to read. It's old. They won't understand this. Blah, blah, blah. And the thing we all have to remember is that kids play with objects that represent other things all the time. It's like saying that's not a real car, and that's not a real person. So it's an 18-inch high plastic representation of a human, and you put 8 kids out in the yard, and this is base, and this is if you touch this rock, this happens. So they're in touch with their imagination way more. So you just put them in a room and shut off the lights and put on a film, and it's it's almost a visceral reaction. My go-to short for little kids is Oranges and Lemons with Stan Laurel. It's a one-reeler. It's got a lot of great slapstick, a lot of people falling down, and yes, there are titles. And all you have to do is tell kids in the first half, Stan is trying to pick oranges off of a tree. In the second half, he's trying to pack them in boxes. And then don't worry about what the words on the screen are saying. And the first laugh that you hear, you can almost hear the surprise and the newness of it because it's a kind of humor they've never experienced. And it's just thrilling, and there's a school here in Manhattan I play every year for their 4th or 5th graders, and we even during COVID I streamed it into the school. But the last time we did something in person during the Q&A, I said yes. There's a hand goes up, and this young woman who must have been 9 or 10 says, "Can we see it again?"
Oh, that's awesome.
I showed them 1 week, which is my other go-to short. So it's really important to put these films in front of kids, or any kind of an audience, as long as it's the thing about to do it in a school setting where they have to be there, and then once it's like anything with silent film, just get somebody into the theater once, and then they'll get it. And even one of my students in my course that I teach at Wesleyan, she joined the class in the 3rd week because that's when drop ad ends, and she just got in under the wire, and she never had seen silent film before. And week 3 is Orphans of the Storm, and we were talking about it the following week because it's a long film. We ran out of time for conversation, but she said she was really so pleased and so pleasantly surprised at how much she really enjoyed the film. She had no idea how it was going to go. And I said, yeah, that's what I always hear. This was way more fun than I thought it was going to be. So that's what I call audience preservation, especially with school groups. And there's so...
I have to just quickly...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I don't mean to cut you off. I just have to say, is that I have someone who's a boy who's about to turn 5. And Christmas, this past Christmas was the first time that he didn't play with the box. He actually played with the toy. So, I mean, just to your point on the imagination of a child, I haven't really made that connection before, but I see it all the time.
Yeah. Oh no. As soon as the film fades in, and they're just in it. Adults, I can feel the audience slowly. Their radar gets retuned, and then they're into it. There are some films that are good where there's a physical gag at which you can't help laughing. So, and that's always a good release, especially for a show for teenagers who are too cool. You do a show for teenagers, and the boys are in the back of the room, and the girls are in the front of the room, and they're too cool to laugh. And with 1 week, it's the moment when Buster is straddling the 2 cars, running boards, and the motorcycle hits him. Because nobody's expecting that. And there is this huge splatter of a laugh that happens. And from that point on, it gives them permission to laugh at the rest of the picture. With The Immigrant, as soon as Henry Bergman, in a dress, starts sliding back and forth on the mess hall floor or whatever, that always gets a huge laugh. And from that point on, they feel, okay, it's okay to laugh at this. But it's really important to show these films to younger people so that they know it's okay. And once they get a little older and they don't go, if you mention something, even if it's like, oh, it's Metropolis, it's really cool, and then, I don't know, yeah.
I think you're right about the impression that people have of silent film is often like the thing that needs to be gotten past. I always think of the beginning of that Kevin Brownlow series Hollywood, where they kind of give the impression that for a long time way people saw silent film was at the wrong speed, a very doopy print, just kind of stock music plastered over it. And then, of course, they show you, I think it's a clip from the Fire Brigade or
Yeah, it's the
something.
Fire Brigade. Yeah.
Right. And it's just, I think introduction is such a fundamental thing to introduce people to, viewing a silent film in the correct environment can kind of get people hooked right away.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's very important. Is yeah, introducing people and this, it's the stereotype of what silent film is, as well as just the word silent, just puts people off. My joke is like it's like saying, hey, we're all going to go out to a bar, but it's in a library, you know. but the thing is that even people who are quote unquote making new silent films are still perpetuating the stereotype with the awful flowery border that I think we all first saw in the Raymond Rohauer reissues of Keaton films, or even before that, and the flowery lettering. There's a free font called Speedball that I've never seen in a silent film, and it's so crazy that the stereotypes that were spoofs of in the 1930s and 40s making fun of silent movies have held through the 40s and 50s, and now people who are making silent movies with their iPhones are adding dust and scratches and that awful. There's a border that I see all the time. That if you type in silent movie title background on Google, this thing will come up, and there's no way to erase it from the internet. But there's so many stereotypes of what it really is, and then you show them Sunrise, and they're like, "Oh, wait a second." Oh, that's what this. Oh, wait a minute. Or pretty much anything.
It's funny you call it Sunrise. That was my intro to silent films.
Yeah.
Not having grown up with it. That was the first one I saw. That the first 5 minutes I was like kind of skeptical, and then as it got going, I actually asked my friend who showed it to me. I said, "Did they come in and like add these title cards in later? They feel different." Everything you're saying resonates very well.
Yeah, yeah. Sunrise is aside from showing somebody a comedy, that's the other thing that a lot of people have seen for the first time and thought, "Oh, wait a second."
Yeah. Eric, you had I don't know if this is the right time for it, but you had actually found some old music, right, or some old.
Yeah. So a few months back, I went to like a rare bookshop, and I found this book it's printed in 1924, and it's all sheet music with the telling you the different genres, like what pages to flip to, things like that.
That's Motion Picture Moods put together by Erno Rapé, who's one of the top orchestral conductors in New York City. Eric is holding it up so I can see it on Zoom, but you're listening to this, so just yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. The famous Motion Picture Moods book. Yeah.
So how often was that used? Like, because that came out in 1924. So how often was that really used?
I'm not sure about that particular book. That's the only book of its kind that was published during the silent film era. And mostly, pretty much every movie theater had a huge library of several hundred of those cues. And even the Motion Picture Moods book, because Rapé had an agenda to educate the patrons of his theater in the canon of music, of classical music. There's a lot more classical music in that book than there are mood cues. But that was just his agenda. But pretty much what people did is they worked from the huge mood cue library that they had, and a lot of those survive. And interestingly, they survive as if somebody went into an orchestra pit in a movie theater, scooped up the entire library and stuck it in steamer trunks, and now it's in a special collection in Texas or Colorado or New York, or I'm sure Eastman Museum has a collection, or it's either the Eastman Museum or the Eastman School of Music. I know Philip Carley has told me a lot about that. But basically, the way you might put together a mixtape, you are compiling a score from all of these mood cues, and so, but copies of the Rapé book do turn up from time to time, and that was like, I went to when I was playing at NYU, the first thing I did is try to find something, and I went to the Bobst library, and they had a copy of that, and I kind of used a little, it's maybe 2 inches thick, and it's all the different moods, and then there's in the margins on the left and right hand side are a list of all the moods or things like cars and airplanes, and a page number. You would just flip to it. But sometimes a pianist would have the moods in stacks on top of a piano. So, and then you would play for something, they pull a waltz, and then they needed a chase, they'd grab a chase and just play that way. But I don't know really how often that book was used, but definitely there were a lot of people who had it, because every once in a while somebody will email me, like, hey, I just found this in a bookshop, and do you have it? And yeah, I have a copy of it. I actually, about 15 years ago, the company that now owns G. Schirmer's, which published the Rapé book, hired me to do another version of it. So there's a book called Music for the Silent Films that has 50 mood cues that I picked after playing through several hundred of them. And there's an essay in it about the history of film music and stuff like that. But if you really want to get into this stuff, it's all online at the Silent Film Sound and Music Archive, or sifsma.org. There's just hundreds and hundreds of these mood cues available. So that's just easier than buying a book and prying it open. Yeah, good find though.
I know you said so there are some accompanists who stick very close to the cue sheets.
Yeah.
And I think Mont Alto Orchestra comes to mind as being very authentic to the music that would have been played at the time.
Yeah.
But certainly oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but the Mont Alto Orchestra, they use the mood cues, but Rodney Sauer does not follow the cue sheets, because like I said, they don't really hold up. I asked him once, do you use the cue sheets? Oh no. So he'll compile his own score, much as anybody else did in the 1920s.
Right. The wrong terminology there.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, the cue sheets I know have been very useful in restorations and reconstructions, because sometimes if intertitles are missing, those lines are on the cue sheets, which is the order and not the actual music.
Yeah.
If I'm getting that right.
Yeah, it's like a roadmap.
Right. But certainly, I guess there's a spectrum of how close people, whether their theory of accompaniment is close to what people would have heard at the time, to some very kind of experimental scores.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Something really, an interesting example I think that really does work was the BFI Blu-ray release of Underground, the Anthony Asquith film, had a very interesting score. I'm forgetting the guy's name. It's Chris something. That was all these kind of, the film takes place in the London Underground and all these kind of industrial settings. And so the artist had kind of created all these noisescapes of, the sounds that you hear when you're in the subway and when you're out by a factory. And it was not music, but it was really, I think there's a wonderful Neil Brand score on that film as well. But it was very interesting to kind of hear the difference in how, and going back to how the music can affect your viewing of the film. So I was just wondering how you felt about the kind of breadth of different kind of scores people do.
Well, I'm on the side of silent film, and if it gets people interested, then that's, like I said, we just got to get people in the door for the first time so that they'll get it. And if it's one of these bang on the can kind of scores, but that's your first exposure, and now you're hooked. Then that's great, but and at the same time, there are people who are piano accompanists who have done lousy jobs and ruined films. And I've seen there's a festival in northern Norway that I used to play at every year, called Silent Film Days or Stumfilmdagar, and they used to have a punk band from Finland called Cleaning Women, who would come and play for things, and it was great, but they really scored the film. So as way out as their music was, the mood shifted when the film needed the music to shift, and they would stop and start with it. I've seen bands just wail and without any regard for what's happening on screen. So I think that as long as the film is being scored, but in a way that helps an audience connect with the flow of what's happening, it can work. And in the same way, a traditional classical score can just completely not work. So I think a lot of it has to do with how carefully the scoring is done. I mean, I've seen a bunch of different kinds of things like that, and I've seen it work and I've seen it not work.
Right. It seems to be one of those things where you want the score to feel like it's in the same room, it's interacting with the film,
right?
And not just
Yeah, because the more an audience has to work to line it up with what they're watching, then the harder it is for them to get into the world of the film, and that's the main thing, is to get you into the world of the film and keep you up there. And for me, what I try to do is to honor I try to, as much as I can, honor the work that went into the film, and try to understand the director's viewpoint as I can, or understand the culture, if there's a viewpoint that needs to be supported. But I'm not, there are people who just hate anything that doesn't sound like Gaylord Carter, and there are people who will just say, oh, I don't like that boring classical music, but there are a variety of things, and if it works, great. And especially if it gets you into the theater for the first time, that's my main thing. Is like if it got you into the theater, and you want to see more, great. It's usually not the weird score that makes people go, oh, I saw I saw a man with a movie camera, but these people are playing this noisy score. I'm never seeing a silent film again. And I mean, that never happens.
Right.
At least it's live. And we just have to get people into the room to experience it.
The way you describe it, sorry, just kind of coming as the dumb one in the room here, as far as experience, the way you're describing it, I'm loving this. Though it's almost as if I'm kind of hearing you say, the music that accompanies the movie is sort of like the heart of the movie, right? And that's how people connect to it.
Well, to some degree, I mean, it helps. Well, the heart, I think maybe the closing line of Metropolis of the meeting being the mediator between the hands and the heart, because it's all it's all up on the screen. So what the music does is, and it's up on the screen, and then the rest that's supplied in our right brains is something that we bring from our own human experience up into that world. And what the music is there to do is to help enhance that. And help you connect with anything that you may need help connecting with emotionally, or just focus in terms of where you're supposed to look in the frame and that sort of thing. So we're in the service of the film and the audience.
Yeah, and I was thinking of a quote recently. You had said something about that it's more of a role of supporting the film, but not mirroring the film.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, mirroring, just, smacking the keys when somebody falls down, or playing a song title pun, or that, something where the audience is aware of the accompanist, because it's a weird mindset for anyone who's a composer and performer, that the whole idea is for people to not be aware of what you're doing. Lee Irwin always said the best thing you can hear from somebody after a show is, I forgot you were playing. And I find that I do shows, and people will come up to me after the show, and we just talk about the film. And I think I don't think it's because they hated my music so much they don't want to mention it, but I think that they were, if they've had such a good time with the film that they come up to me and we just start talking about this scene or that scene, I feel like I've done, I've done my job.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about just the accompaniment aspect of things because you're involved in so much.
Yeah.
And actually, that is one of the kind of remarkable things about you is that you are, I feel like there is a bit of a debate constantly raging about, the way to see a film and the only way to see a film. The thing that's really interesting about you is that you're fundamentally involved with theatrical performance. You accompany live films. And then you have this whole other side where you are, putting out silent films on home media for people to watch in their homes. And with the silent comedy watch party, you're also involved with live, streaming in a way of people watching that live. So you've got your hands in a lot of buckets.
I wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of hyphens flying around, and with the live streaming, I had always had the idea, but before COVID, figured, I don't want to do anything that's going to keep people from going to a theater. What I've discovered is there's a whole audience of people, which of course makes sense, for whom there is no art house to go to.
Right.
We did a live stream. I do one every month for the Cinema Arts Center, and I think it was Beauty's Worth with Marion Davies, and I leave the chat off. I don't like to chat during the film because it's just people saying, that was awesome. Oh, yeah, how are you? But I turn it on at the end when we do the broadcast, the streams with Cinema Arts Center, so we can have a Q&A. And it's been great, and we always tell people, if you're going to post a comment, tell us where you're watching from. And there was a woman who wrote, I'm watching in Iowa, and thanked us for doing this because she says, I have no way of seeing silent film with live accompaniment. And so, as the pandemic, I hope tapers off and we can start going back to movie theaters. My intention is not to stop. We may drop the frequency of the silent comedy watch party down to once a month. But even the Cinema Arts Center, we're going to do our first in-person show in April or May. And Dylan Skolnick, who's the co-director of the cinema, and I've been doing a show there since 2006, but he said even when we go back to in-person, he wants to continue doing the live streams because, we have people who say, I'm watching from Hungary, and I'm in Canada, the western end of Canada, and people from Buenos Aires are watching. So, I don't think it's keeping people from going to cinemas, and we've certainly introduced a lot of people to things. So I wear a lot of hats, and there's on top of all this, I'm also the archivist for the Ernie Kovacs and Edie Adams collection. So
it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Oh no! I don't mean to. Please.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, it reminds me of. This may sound like a weird example, but the when the Dave Matthews Band got started, the industry was completely flabbergasted that they let people live record their shows, because they were just like, well, they actually would let people plug into their soundboard, and at that time, it just wasn't done in the industry. They're like, well, you're ruining your earning potential, and they're like, nah, I don't see it that way. And obviously, it worked out well for them. But I think it's just the idea of like, if the goal is to get people to watch the content or listen to the content or see it, then be more open to exploring these different avenues to get people that wouldn't otherwise see it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it worked pretty well for the Grateful Dead. I mean, they always had a section here, tape our concert, and you stand over here and tape our concert. And this is the thing that's changed in the last maybe 10 years, and that I've become very aware of. And part of why I got into doing the home video releases is I was one of the things I was researching at the time, and this is I think what got me into trying to do more with social media and learning about Kickstarter, is I was looking at I saw a bunch of videos and webinars for people in the music industry for whom the bottom fell out 25 years ago. with iTunes and Napster and now Spotify, your music's everywhere and you get 2 cents a year. And what's happened is that it's become about access and not controlling. You can't. I mean, the ability to control your music by being a gatekeeper is gone, and that cat is out of the bag and it's not coming back.
Sure.
And
Right.
so I was looking into how I could apply that to what I do, and it's this is where everybody is right now, especially the film archives, because when it comes to silent film, in 2 years, everything is going to be in the public domain. So how do you monetize the collection? How do you get any kind of return on your investment? And it's an investment where, a particular film, an archive may have spent decades, conserving it and winding through it and checking it and having to fundraise to get a preservation negative made because it's starting to go, but it doesn't have anybody famous in it, but it's really important. And, it's not like the Library of Congress where they can, oh, well, this smells a little, let's send it out to the lab. Every film archive is in this weird position, not weird, it's the same, we're all in the same position. So what do you do with the film? And even the whole physical media game may be changing. I can't tell because as much as streaming is taking over, or it's becoming more and more prevalent, and there are people who do not have players, there are still, like you guys, people who do have DVD and Blu-ray players, and you have an HDMI cables. Oh, heaven forbid! I got it. You didn't cut the cable. What's wrong with you? But I also think that there's something to it, in that as human beings there is a need for ceremony that we have, and there's something in the same thing with vinyl. It's not just that the sound is warmer, but there's something about walking over to the turntable, lifting the lid, taking the disc out of the sleeve. Every record has its own smell. Especially if you have something that's in a gatefold, you open that gatefold, oh, this record, and you put it on. Then you put the dust thing on, and then you place the needle on, and you sit down. And it's the same thing, like which we've all encountered during the pandemic, is that with Zoom, it's like Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. You're suddenly there, and then okay, I'll see you later. Bloop. And there's no transition. There's no fade.
Sure.
You're not walking through the lobby, chatting with people. Oh, I'll see you later. You want to get some coffee? It's just on and off. And I think that the act of taking something off of your shelf and taking the disc out, and you open the case, and there's this nice disc face, and you put it into the player, and you push the button, you sit down, and you watch the FBI logo, and here comes the menu. And even if it's a single menu, there's that whole ceremony of it, and I think that's why I think that's why people are still interested in physical media, and the people who aren't, that's fine. But we're in this time where access is very important, especially like we're talking about audience preservation and trying to. It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand you do want money to change hands and you do want to be compensated, but if the films aren't available, then what do you do? It's a very strange paradox that I'm sure, Kirk, you work at the Eastman Museum. I'm sure the number of complaints. Well, why don't you let us see this? And can't I click on this and see that? Just because you have an archive has a print, I should be able to click on something and see it. Well, it's not that easy. It's not that simple.
I was going to bring that up. I naively asked Kirk if the whole collection was digitized, and I think he was a little bit struck by the question when I asked him, because he's like, well, no. I mean, he was very nice about it, but it's very expensive to do that.
And the Eastman Museum has and you guys, the Eastman Museum has scanning equipment, but the number of reels of film and the number of people there are to take care of them and deal with it. Fans have no idea that it's just impossible to get everything done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's, I mean, yeah, I mean, archives are limited like anything else. They have limited people, and, always money is a huge issue for everything.
Yeah.
Which is why this Kickstarter model is really so, in a way, perfectly fit for a silent film. And I think it's kind of revolutionary and continues to be, as more and more stuff comes out that way, as more and more stuff enters the public domain. And I'm sure when you talk to Rob Stone at the NAVCC about, finding something that doesn't have donor restrictions and is the public domain and is a good fit. But, besides those, in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty small hoops to jump through. And if you can get through those hoops, a lot of stuff that would never be commercially viable for some of the, the bigger labels, getting that out to people, it's a great era for that.
Yeah, and that's what's great about manufacture on demand, is that you each product is made on demand, literally, and you're not pressing 1,500 and hoping to make your money back. I live in an apartment in New York City. I don't have room for that, and I did press product on When I Did Was in Flower, the Marion Davies picture, and after 5 years, I was able to get rid of the last of the product, and then only by having a fire sale on Amazon, by dropping the price to $5, just to blow a couple hundred copies out the door, just to be done with it. And that's a film with a semi name. So yeah, the combination of Kickstarter, crowdfunding through fans. Kickstarter gets the credit, but it's really, this is why I always make sure on my projects that I don't say this was funded through Kickstarter. I say this was funded by 575 classic film fans through Kickstarter, because it's really the catchphrase I came up with for, I think, my third or fourth Kickstarter video is, why not be part of the somebody, and why doesn't somebody put that out on DVD? Because, and what's happened over the last 10 years is that everybody gets it now. Whether it's me or Ed LaRusso or Grapevine or anybody, everybody understands now that this is a way for something that doesn't have Charlie Chaplin in it to get out there to fans. Is the crowdfunding and manufacture on demand. I mean, some people prefer press product, and if that's your thing, that's fine. But it just economically doesn't really work. But so we are in this time when money can be raised from fans for things to happen, so it's been great to do this.
Just to demystify that a little bit for people, could you explain, just from the conversations about what kind of film could be a possible project to getting that out there to people? How does that all work?
Okay. Sometimes it's just a matter of something that will strike my interest, from going through a list of things that are in the public domain or about to enter the public domain, and making sure there are no donor restrictions. So that's hurdle number one. Do I like it? Do I think it's funny? Do Steve and I think this is worthwhile? And if it's something you haven't heard of, then you find a way to make it look like it's something you should have heard of. And so some of that is, a lot of that is from just basic marketing, and also the graphic design. Marlene Weissman does an amazing job on all of our covers, and I think they're the same caliber in terms of artistry as what you might see on a Criterion or a Kino or a Flickr Alley, and this sort of white label style of design looks that way. I mean, without reading the text, if you're looking at something that Alpha put out, you know what the production design is. So a lot of it is comes from that, and Marlene's got an amazing knack for making something look like it's something you've already heard of a lot. even though you've never heard of Alice Howell. So that's part of it. And then I think I have found that building up some kind of a presence on Twitter more than the other social media, because Twitter you can share. It's just you click and the retweet is just there. I mean, Instagram, it's really complicated. You know, my wife is on Instagram. She'll see something. She keeps saying, "How do I share this?" I say, I don't know. It's not easy. And Facebook, it's not. That's not what Facebook is about. But I think I first noticed that happening when I did the Kickstarter for When Night Was in Flower. It's a Marion Davies picture. So all the TCM classic film fans were retweeting and getting the word out there. So that's that part of it. I mean, so you have to get the money. So you raise the money, and then you pay for the files, and then you hire the compass, which is very easy. I know somebody. I work with them all the time. Although I don't always work with me. We have things coming out this year that John Marsalis and Andrew Simpson have scored. And then it's just the basic production. And sometimes if the funding just goes and goes and goes, then I now have money to hire somebody to do digital cleanup. So I often work with Thad Komorowski from Cineast Restorations, and I've for the Edward Everett Horton shorts, I've worked with Ben Solovey at Origins Archival. And if you can afford digital cleanup and stabilization, it's a wonderful thing. If you can't, and then you don't, and you hire somebody to do grading. And so we've worked with Chris Kraus, who Kirk, you work with him at Eastman Museum, and so there's the fundraising, there's the production, editing, creating new titles if needed, the scoring. Then it all gets married together, and then there's the authoring. I've recently learned how to author Blu-rays, and that's why the Xander the Great is now out in both formats. Beverly of Graustark will be out in both formats, because I know there are people who won't buy DVDs, and there are people who don't have Blu-ray players, and we will probably at some point later in the year try to move into video on demand. So then there's a matter of once it's all done, I work with Alliance Entertainment from my MOD. They're one of the companies. There's another one, Vaughn. I forget what their full name is. There's another one where they take care of all the manufacturing. They get you up on all the websites. So I moved over to Alliance about 4 or 5 years ago, which was great because CreateSpace was just Amazon, and getting onto the other sites was really, really complicated. And you had to be a big company. So now that Alliance offers Blu-ray, again, it's burnt product, but so far it's been going okay. So then there's the authoring, the graphics, and then the promotion, and then that's writing up a press release and developing a press list, and that a lot of that I have learned comes from developing relationships with people, whether they're bloggers or, well, I don't think any major publication has anybody reviewing film anymore. But getting to know who those people are so that when you send them something, they'll write about it. And is finding just, there's always, you're looking for more people. But, and then you hope for the best. But I believe in the long tail. Which is, make everything available, and that way, if anybody's looking for it, it's there. I'm not going to buy a yacht with royalties from this. Sometimes the royalties pay my light bill, and sometimes they do a little bit better than that. I can pay my light bill and my phone bill, and my wife and I can go out to dinner. But it's really, all of us, including Ed LaRusso and John Marsalis and Andrew Simpson, and the people I've co-produced stuff with, we're all like, we know there's no money in this. So if there's money, that's wonderful. So that's a basic overall arc. It's the having the idea, knowing where the print is, knowing where you can get it, knowing what it's going to cost, raising the money, Then there's the production, post production, and then you do the best you can with publicity, and then you see where it goes from there. And then the dream of course, is getting to license something to TCM, which I've been able to do in a few cases.
One of the things that really jumps out as you're talking, that I kind of wanted, I had assumed this was going to be true for you, but hearing it live, it really resonates, is that you're an amazing ambassador for what you do. You have this ability to convince people that it's important because you believe it very deeply. It's not something that you're selling. Like, it's very true to you. I'm curious, I have a background in studies in psychology. So one of the things that's true in that field is there were the greats, there was the Freuds and the Jungs, and like there was these people that sort of like that set the foundation that then other psychologists kind of came along and built on, and the trade progresses, so to speak, right? And as I read so that's my lens on the world. So I think as I was reading your background, I saw Lee Irwin and then Ben Model, and it kind of felt like, okay, there's this sort of this legacy that's being continued through you, right?
Yeah.
Because you learned from one of the greats. Do you see part of what you do is helping find the next Ben Model and kind of finding those people that can carry it on? Do you think about that much?
I do, only in the sense that it hasn't happened. Because every once in a while, somebody will say at a Q&A, "Oh, are you training in somebody?" And the answer is no. It's not because I don't want to, but that person hasn't appeared as yet in terms of film accompaniment. Doing Kickstarters and stuff like that, I've advised several people, help them get over the hurdles of doing their first Kickstarter or doing something that they haven't done a Kickstarter for before. So I'm happy to, like, I found this thing that works. Once you just get past the idea that you're asking a lot of people for money, here's how it all works, and this is way you can get something out there that you feel passionate about. But passing something on from one generation on to the next is a big, it's a big part of what I do. And my wife is the same way. She's in the musical theater, but her parents were both on Broadway during the golden age, and my wife's grandfather was on the stage. He did very little film. He's the house detective and the golf specialist, and he's the punch drunk fighter in The Thin Man. But there's this multi-generational thing that we're passing. She teaches musical theater at Manhattan School of Music and at Barnard, and she feels like she's passing something from one generation on to the next. And I feel like the same thing. I am connected with a handful of younger people, people who were in their teens or in college age. I mean, I met them when they were in their teens, and I feel like whatever I can do to help them. I used to be that guy, or that young woman. I used to be this 12-year-old who didn't know anybody who liked this stuff, and so when I encounter someone like that, I lean in. This is how I discovered what Discord is. I wound up being in contact with somebody who was a regular viewer of the Silent Comedy Watch Party, who said, "Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of us." And these people who are high school age and college age who all watch the Silent Comedy Watch Party together over a Discord server. I had to look up Discord, and now I know what that is. But I was like, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I don't want to show up because you don't want Dad in the room. But if there's anything I can do, I will periodically pick up copies of the Silent Clowns on eBay or Amazon. And as I meet newer, younger people who like this stuff, I send them a copy, because it's a lot of people don't know about the book, The Silent Clowns, and because it's such an important book, I'll send it to them.
Well, I hate to speak for people, but I mean, I think Eric, maybe not so much on the music part, but at least the love of silent film, that feels like he's kind of telling your story, right? I mean, you were one of those high schoolers, right, that was just drawn to this and needed that outlet to be able to find these movies and be able to experience this early on. Or maybe it was college for you. I don't remember exactly when.
Yeah, for me, it's more so college. I was interested in film, and then I started taking some film classes, and I started injecting the silent films. And a lot of the things you said really rings true. Like, I took a Soviet and Eastern European film class, and the first day the professor said that, just so you know, half the films we're going to watch are silent. And then the next class, half the class is gone. Like that many people dropped it and they didn't even give it a chance. So
Wow.
that was really heartbreaking to see.
Yeah.
But,
What was the first thing they showed you?
I think it was an Eisenstein film. I don't remember which one it was. A couple years back.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't even get to the first film. It was just the intro class where they do the syllabus, kind of talking about it, and then never came back. So I wonder if she did kind of get that foot in the door by showing something, so it's not as scary, like you mentioned.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm glad the teacher. Well, I mean, there's so much history in the silent Russian films, anyways. You know, it's all depictions of revolutions and stuff like that. So you can't. It's all part of the cultural history anyway. So yeah, but that. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Everybody just half the class bailed when they heard it was silent, black and white. Yeah,
but that, I mean, it takes that to find half the class that can stay, right, and fall in love with this because they experience it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the work that at least it feels like to me. Like I'm a good case study for somebody who I think left to my own proclivities would not see silent films because of everything all the biases that we were talking about early on. And as I see them, one of the things that sounds so dumb to say this, but one of the things that jumps out to me is that there's not really as big of a separation as you think. Like the jokes are funny, the emotional beats are there, and the dramas. The way people talk sometimes is very natural, even with the titles, the intertitles. And these are some things that I was surprised by. And I wish those biases weren't there because there's actually a lot of humanity in silent films and a lot of ways to easily connect emotionally, even though it's a different format than we're accustomed to.
Yeah, definitely.
We asked for 30 or 40 minutes, and you've been so gracious to give us a lot more. Kirk, Eric is. The last question I have for you is going to be around kind of what's next for you, and I want to make time for that. Before we get to that, Kirk, Eric, is there anything else that you're burning to ask while we have Ben on the line?
You actually answered a lot of my questions just while talking.
Okay.
So you answered a lot of them.
Okay.
So that worked out very well.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say, yeah, most of my points I wanted to hit are covered. So.
Oh, okay. All right.
Wonderful.
All right. Okay.
So then, yeah. What's next? I mean, just at a quick look at silentfilmmusic.com, there's 5 or 6 concurrent projects that you're working on. Is there any that you'd like to highlight? Do you want to talk about all of them? The floor is yours. What's coming up? Do you want people to know about?
Yeah, sure. I need to update my website because none of my in-person performances and streams for the last few months are there, or anything that I've got coming up. In addition to going back to in-person shows, there are a number of DVD and Blu-ray projects that we have in the hopper. So one of them is the Beverly of Graustark, which is the 4K restoration that the Library of Congress did that was shown in October 2019 in Pordenone. And it's a great film. It's so much fun. It's the first one of her films that is a comedy and not a light drama with some comic elements and a lot of costumes. It's the first one that feels like, oh, this is like Show People and the Patsy. Directed by Sidney Franklin. Great cast. Creighton Hale, Antonio Moreno, Roy Darcy, and the original 2-color Technicolor ending is intact. So that is something that will be out, I think, in April or May on Blu-ray and DVD. Also, I'm working with John Marsalis on a release of a second volume of Lon Chaney Before the Thousand Faces, which we did one with him a few years ago. So this is early Lon Chaney films that he made in the teens at Universal and other studios, and this will be a 2-disc set. John's gathered that much material. We are working on a restoration of The Craving, the Francis Ford feature. Kathy Fuller Seeley at the UT Austin. That's her project. We've gotten the file from iFilm Museum, and it's been cleaned up and stabilized, and it looks great. And we're now working on translating the titles back into English. And there are a few shorts on that. One of which we got from the George Eastman Museum, Unmasked, and so we've gotten that from there, and a couple of shorts that from the USC, the Hefner Archive, and Library of Congress. So there's that project. Andrew Simpson did a Kickstarter for a film called Back Pay, which is an early Frank Borzage film written by Francis Marion.
Uh-huh.
And this is the thing where he played for it and really just Andrew played for the film and really liked it, and so he did this Kickstarter. And again, the funding went on, and he's added a film called Valley of Silent Men, which is another Borzage picture. Both of these films only survived because they were produced by Cosmopolitan Productions, and therefore were part of the Marion Davies collection. So you don't think of Marion Davies as a film conservationist, but there's a lot of silent film that only survives because Hearst produced it, and she had prints of it that went to the Library of Congress in the 50s. What else? I know there's something else I'm blanking on. And the next Kickstarter is going to be for a pair of Raymond Griffith features. These have been scanned in 2 or 4K from Nitrate by the Library of Congress, and that'll be my next Kickstarter. Raymond Griffith is arguably the fifth head on the Mount Rushmore of silent comedy, and his films just haven't been available. And this was something where I was able to get permission from Paramount because they're part of the studio collection. So that's the next thing. That and a pair of Tom Mix features. Tom Mix's films have never been on home video. I don't know why, but that is also the state of silent westerns. I don't think Bill Hart's films have hardly been on, and the rest, all the other silent movie western stars like Hoot Gibson. Aside from things on Alpha and Grapevine, so a lot of different things. And what's been great is going back into in-person stuff. I'm getting to meet people who've been watching the Silent Comedy Watch Party for 2 years, and they have pins and this shirt or a T-shirt or mugs, and they wave at me with one hand when I get up and take my bow, and it's been great connecting with folks who've connected with me, me and Mana and Steve and Susan and Crystal and Marlene online that way. And I'm sure there's something I'm blanking on, but it's been great to have the opportunity to work together with fans to get these things out from film cans to film fans, as I like to say. As you three have experienced, there, as much as people tell you, oh, I can stream that and streaming this and cutting the cord, there are definitely lots and lots of people who do buy physical media and like to have things on a shelf in some sort of order. I always say no collector will hold up any terabyte hard drive and say, "Look, it's my film collection." There's just something about just browsing and looking at a shelf of stuff. So it's been great to get to be able to do this and to help people discover silent filmmakers and performers like Marcel Perez, who are just unknowns until now.
And the best thing for you is if they shop at undercrankproductions.com as these discs come out, right?
My royalties are the same no matter where you buy the product. But
okay.
But if you go to undercrankproductions.com first and then click, then it helps my SEO. So that's great. If you go to Undercrank Productions and click your way to other stuff. But my releases are on everything: Amazon, Deep Discount, Critics' Choice, Movies Unlimited, internationally on Wow HD, and lots of other places. And if I ever get to a movie theater to do a show, I'll bring them to sell at the merch table.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been an education for me, and I think it's fun to hear you and Kirk and Eric kind of talk, and amazing. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for making this time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My website's Silent Film Music. My podcast is the Silent Film Music Podcast, and I'm on all the various social media at the @ Silent Film Music. And so I'm eminently findable if you have questions and want to look up and see what I'm up to. But Eric and Kirk and Chris, thanks so much for having me on and thinking of me and thinking of having me on your show.